Hi Year 7, so this is lesson 2 of your remote learning for Gothic writing. So in this lesson we are going to be focusing on how to develop your writing to help you become better writers in terms of creating a Gothic setting. So let's get started. So last lesson, you were asked to create the ultimate Gothic setting as if you were going to be opening a film or a play. And I know that a lot of you came up with some really sinister, quite scary settings, such as old schools and hospitals. And, you thought about your weather choices and you really already have lots of ideas beyond just the typical graveyard situations. So you're now going to be using that and taking inspiration from something else to help you develop your writing a bit further. So, first thing I would like you to do is using the image that's in front of you of the moon and the buildings that looks, I guess, quite typically Gothic. I would like you to write down a sentence using one of the following techniques to describe the image above. So your task basically is to use a simile, a metaphor and an adverb. So a simile is a type of figurative language when you describe something which is like or as something it can't literally be. So for example, surrounding the house like a blanket, the forest darkness was overwhelming. So we're saying that it's like a blanket. So the forest can't, be a blanket. So that's our simile. The metaphor, I know that you'll be able to do a better job with it than this. The moon was a monster. And the adverb sentence starter. So an adverb is when you are describing the action, so describing the verb. So it could be eerily, silently, suspiciously, and what you really want to do is to create a little bit of tension. So I'm going to now suggest that you pause this video for a couple of minutes to have a go at coming up with a simile, a metaphor, and an adverb. Next, guys, you are going to either choose to find an image which you think represents your idea, so have a look on Google, or some of you will love drawing. You can even draw your own image to base your Gothic setting on. You're then going to repeat the steps that you did previously, where you're going to write down one sentence using the following techniques to describe your own image. So you need to have a simile, a metaphor, and an adverb to go with your image. And you're going to be using this image to eventually write a short story. So it's going to be really important that you choose your image really carefully. So if you're having any second thoughts where you think, I don't really like that image, now is the opportunity to change that idea, which is absolutely fine. So once again, I'd say just pause the video for a couple of minutes, think about finding an image or drawing an image first, and then spend a few minutes writing those 3 sentences down. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is use ideas from other writers to develop a little bit more creatively. So you're going to be reading an extract from The Red Room by H.G. Wells, and when we're looking at reading a Gothic text, it's really important that we look at the overall mood, language choices, the setting, and the characters. So what can we say about the overall mood, language choices, the setting, and the characters from The Red Room? So let's have a read of it and see what we think. So I must confess that the oddness of these 3 old pensioners in whose charge her ladyship had left the castle, and the deep-toned, old-fashioned furniture of the housekeeper's room, in which they foregathered, affected me in spite of my efforts to keep myself at a matter-of-fact phase. They seemed to belong to another age, an older age, an age when spiritual were different from this of ours. Less certain, an age when omens and witches were credible and ghosts beyond denying. Their very existence was spectral, the cut of their clothing, fashions born from dead brains. The ornaments and conveniences of the room about them were ghostly. The thoughts of vanished men, which haunted rather than participated in the world of today, but with an effort it sent such a thought to the right about. The long, draughty, subterranean passage was chilly and dusty. My candle flared and made the shadows cower and quiver. The echoes ran up and down the spiral staircase, and a shadow came sweeping up after me, and once fled before me into the darkness overhead. I came to the landing. I stopped there for a moment, listening to the rustling that I fancied I heard. Then, satisfied with an absolute silence, I pushed open the baize-covered door and stood in the corridor. So even if you don't really understand all of the words because it is a much older text, you get the sense that it is building tension and that the overall mood is a little bit terrifying. We get the sense that something quite sinister is going to be happening. So in the words in bold, you will see that there is a little bit of a glossary there for you. So spectral is just another word for ghost, essentially. Subterranean just means secret or concealed. Baize covered is typically a woolen material resembling kind of a felt, and full gathered just means to gather together. So if we unpick this extract a little bit just to get some ideas, then I think that would really help us. So in the opening, I must confess that the oddness of these three old pensioners, in whose charge her ladyship had left the castle, raises some questions, doesn't it? So we've got some odd three old pensioners. We don't know anything else about them, but it's intriguing us as readers. They're minor characters, but they are making us, question the whole situation. And they are in charge of a lady who's left a castle, which again is intriguing. So you don't always have to explain yourself, and you can explain it later and treat it like a mystery. And the deep-toned, old-fashioned furniture of the housekeeper's room, in which they foregathered, affected me in spite of my efforts to keep myself at a matter-of-fact phase. They seemed to belong to another age, an older age, an age when things were spiritual, were different of ours. So basically, this whole setting is full of really old, curious, quite weird objects, and it's making him feel a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit strange. And then as he progresses, he mentions omens and witches and ghosts beyond denying. He then says their existence was spectral. So it's like this idea that they're ghostly, and there's something really sinister, kind of Halloween-like, about them. And by not specifically telling us what it is, it's making us use our imaginations and making us think, well, what is it about these women that is so scary? We go on a little bit further. The long, drafty subterranean passage. No one likes a draft at all. We're using the temperature here as well. It's chilly and dusty. So this idea it's not very well kept at all, and it's very cold. So it's not the opposite of, it's the opposite of homely and welcoming. And my candle flared and made shadows cower and quiver. So we've all been there, haven't we, where we've had a bad dream and we can imagine shadows on the wall and all the flickering that's going on. So then there are echoes that ran up and down the spiral staircase, and a shadow came sweeping up after me. So we're personifying the shadow as if it's real, like a monster, and it makes you question, is it a monster? One fled before me into the darkness overhead. I came to the landing and stopped there for a moment, listening to the rustling that I fancied I'd heard, and then, satisfied with absolute silence, pushed open the baize-covered door and stood in the corridor. Again, it makes you really intrigued as a reader, because actually, if you didn't feel comfortable in a building, why on earth would your character continue to go into the room? He's made sure that it's silent, that there's nothing else there, but you get the sense that something is going to be jumping out at him. So when you think about the overall mood, that it's quite terrifying. There's some tension. We don't, nothing's really happened yet, but we know that it's going to. The language choices, that they're using quite complex vocabulary to help you imagine what is quite an unusual setting. So the setting is much older, it's more supernatural, and the characters, we don't know who it is that's speaking. We know that it's in first person, which is very effective, but we don't know anything about their backgrounds, and it's all there to just intrigue us. So when you're writing the opening of a story, it's actually a really good thing to leave more questions open for your reader and answer them a little bit later. So now, what I'd like to do, so you have your setting, you have your image, you have a simile, a metaphor, and an adverbial sentence starter. So I would now like you to jot down ideas, so it can just be keywords, you can present it any way that you like, about the mood. So what kind of mood do you want to achieve? Do you want it to be really sinister and scary right from the outset? Or do you want it to be something which is building tension? So could it be nice and calm and then become progressively more sinister and scary? I want you to have a think about some key language choices that you could use. So were there any in the extract that you just looked at where you think, actually, I like the idea of stealing the shadows and the candles and the cold to bring my writing alive a little bit. Then you can think about your characters. You need to think to yourself, well, how much am I going to be telling people about my characters, or am I just going to write it in first person and create a sense of mystery and maybe have like H.G. Wells' story, three old pensioners that we don't know anything about, that just gives us, like a shiver down the spine. And then your setting, as it keeps going back to that, how are you going to make your setting really intriguing and bring it to life as if we can't actually see it? So take the image away, how are you going to bring that image to life? So again, please pause this video and have a go for a few minutes and see if you can jot down your own Gothic setting ideas. Now, I think you're ready to write up your opening. So your success criteria is thoughtful language choices to create a specific mood, descriptive images of the setting, so using imagery with words effectively, so as if your image wasn't there. Ideas of introducing a character or perspective, so it could literally just be in first person or even third person, describing watching someone. That could be really sinister. And you're also going to bring back your use of simile, your use of metaphor, and your adverb sentence starter that you created earlier. And it's really important to remember to challenge yourself by looking for synonyms, more ambitious vocabulary. Try and vary your sentence starters. Keep looking back at the success criteria to make sure that you're happy. Now, this doesn't have to be a very long piece of writing. In fact, it could just be one fantastic paragraph. You should limit yourself as well to how long it should be. It shouldn't be more than a page. And it's more about creating an impact in shorter amount of lines than it is about writing loads and loads. So really do think about your language choices and how you're creating the setting to build up the tension before next lesson, when we start thinking about how we can introduce a monster or a villain into your story.